UFC heads down under as Israel Adesanya defends his middleweight title at UFC 293 this weekend in Australia. Sean Strickland is his adversary in the main event. A co-main event will take place between Tai Tuivasa and Alexander Volkov. Manuel Kape is there, taking on UFC debutant Felipe dos Anjos in the flyweight division. Kiefer Crosbie makes his UFC debut at the very first fight. We'll talk about that fight and all the rest of the fights on this card, Harry. We're just having a little bit of a brief conversation about this card in general. As I always do, I'll hand it over to you just to give us a quick rundown. We will criticize this card as a pay-per-view card as a very, very, very bad pay-per-view card. In my opinion, one of probably the worst in recent memory. On paper, of course, we could have 11 finishes or 12 finishes or whatnot. It could be a brilliant card come Monday, but we always judge it on paper before it happens. And, you know, I think it's fair to be extra critical as a guy who will pay for the pay-per-view every single time. I'll pay 75 Canadian dollars each and every pay-per-view card, which I feel gives me the right to be a little bit cranky or a little bit complainy about this card. I really struggled for the first time to justify it. I probably will do it. I like watching my mixed martial arts live, not 5 minutes behind. And I don't like to live with the anxiety of possibly mid-combination, the stream freezing that we've all experienced that before and we're losing our shit. It's nice to be able to kind of pay for the comfort of knowing that we're going to see it in high definition. But how are your opinions on this card? Like, I mean, the general consensus with a lot of people, you know, UFC have done what they like to do with stars, and Israel Adesanya is a star, no matter what you like to think or not. They have stacked him and put a pretty poor card underneath. We've seen them doing that before with Conor McGregor cards too, to be honest. I don't think Izzy quite has the lure of Conor McGregor yet. I don't think that. I think that a lot of the criticism of this card is probably because of that reason, you know, because people just want to tune in to see Conor McGregor fight. I believe if McGregor was fighting on a card and there was nothing else on it, there would be quite a lot of people that would pay for that as well. But what are your thoughts, is what I'm trying to get to, Harry, about this card in general?
So I think that the point that you made, because I don't think I'd be as harsh as you are being, I don't think it's a good pay-per-view. Let's start there. I really don't think it's a good pay-per-view. I think that there are some interesting fights in that there are names that we know, there are names that we are aware of, and when we watch them, we will be watching people that we're aware of. Right. Obviously, the main event is the big selling point. Israel Adesanya is the big selling point. Sean Strickland and his talking is the big selling point, and that's fine. Though the element that you brought in that I hadn't really thought about, because, you know, arrogantly I don't have to, is people are paying for this. I think over here, at least, because for me specifically in England, I pay my BT Sport membership, and then I don't have to pay for the pay-per-views, right? Maybe once in a blue moon when Conor fights, or they tried it once with the John Jones fight, right? And you know, you have to go and pay or whatever. But it's very, very, very rare that over here in the UK, we have to pay for a pay-per-view. And so I think there's an element there, there's a wrinkle there that I hadn't really considered, and that's that people actually have to pay for this card. And so if we just, I'll do what I always do. I'll just very quickly run through. Obviously, the main event is what it is, right? Tai Tuivasa and Alexander Volkov doesn't really interest me at all, doesn't really move my needle. I'm always interested in watching Manuel Kape fight, but his opponent, I don't really know much about. I haven't had a chance to really have a proper study of him, but coming in at 7-0, that's a tough debut unless he's an absolutely uber prospect. We then have Justin Tafa versus Austin Lane. And I mean, in the SevereMMA group chat, I'll sort of peel the curtain back a little. We're asked by Mr. Andy Stevenson, shout out Andy Stevenson, to put our picks in to the group chat. And I put my pick in for this fight, and I bracketed, who the fuck cares? Like, because
yeah,
who does? Like, you know, Tyson Pedro versus Anton Turkaji, like, that's a good fight in that it's a well-matched fight, but it's not a fight that is opening up a main card, right? Then we have Carlos Ulberg, again, somebody that you're going to watch, is divisionally potentially interesting. Jack Jenkins is always in fun fights. I think Jack Jenkins versus Chepe Mariscal is probably the best fight on the card outside of the main event. And then we have the likes of Mullarkey and, fucking Blood Diamond, whatever. The one thing I will say, and I think that it detracts away from my point because it is a pay-per-view. But if we look at UFC Paris, right, we are both geographically
Fight night card, though, Harry.
Let me finish because I agree with you, but let me finish. It's a card that is full of regional talent, right? Local talent, national talent, I should say, not regional, national talent. Mm-hmm. But it's a fight night. But we know those fighters a bit better because we know Wilson Gomis. We've seen him in Cage Warriors. We've seen him live, right? We've seen Morgan Charrier. We've watched him. So we're a little bit more attached in terms of watching and following their careers. Whereas some of these guys, we only know of them from their UFC careers. But to your point, and this I think is the point I have, to most Australian people and most New Zealand fight fans, this is a great card because they get to see all their national, all their regional fight fans. But what is missing here is that MMA is a global sport and the UFC is the global brand for MMA. And so we have to be aware that whilst, yes, this is going to sell out and probably has sold out in the arena it's happening for because of all the local talent, this is also being streamed to millions and millions of people around the world. And we have to consider those as well. And I understand why they've done what they've done. I understand. Like you said, it's an Israel Adesanya fight, and that alone in a stadium in Australia will sell out fine. But there is still a global audience to cater for.
Be interesting to see. Obviously, we don't get too much pay-per-view numbers or talk, but they're definitely banking on the star power of Israel Adesanya here in the main event against Sean Strickland, Harry. And, it's going to be very interesting to see how that fight goes down with Strickland. Not a lot of people were too kind of forthcoming about this fight, too excited about this fight. We criticized both of these guys before for different reasons. Well, I have more so with Israel than you have, when we've all criticized Sean Strickland for his silliness. It's just MMA in a nutshell that, you can talk mad shit like Sean Strickland does, and this is your reward. You get a title shot. But, he's come out somewhat subdued this week. Boyfriend material Sean Strickland is alive and well this week. He's out there holding hands and going on walks in nature rather than berating women and saying borderline racist shit. So that's a positive. That's a positive that we can take from this. But, you know what? All of that nonsense goes out the window because it's irrelevant once the cage door closed, and Israel Adesanya has his moments to kind of become even more of a star, obviously down there in Australia and in New Zealand. It'll be interesting, like I say, how the pay-per-view does. I think it will give us a good idea if we do hear some rumored numbers on how big the star power of Israel Adesanya is. Like I said, I've been critical of Adesanya quite a bit in the past, but one thing I want to kind of really give him credit for is his activity levels, and another UFC champion should be looking on and seeing how much this guy is fighting and how much he's willing to put himself out there. And it's a credit to him that he's getting out there, and a lot of his star quality and a lot of his kind of pulling power, Harry, is that we've seen him quite often, and we have to give him lots of credit for that, Israel Adesanya.
I could not agree with you more. I think one thing that, again, we have to absolutely commend Israel for is he realized that he came into the game late. He didn't pick up MMA at 15 or 16 and work his way up from a skills perspective to where he is now. He had an entire kickboxing career before he even thought about transitioning over to MMA, at least properly, right? And so he's gone and he's done that, and he's managed to, for better use of the phrase, he's managed to grab his career by the balls, and he said, I'm going to squeeze as much out of this as absolutely possible. And there was a quote that he said recently this week, and somebody asked him sort of about his legacy, about what he thinks about what he's done so far in the sport. And he said, there'll be time for all of that when I've finished my career. At the end of my career, I'll be able to look back and say, Jesus, I really managed to maximize everything out of this career that I possibly did. His terms were, I beat up as many dudes as possible, and fucking hell, I was the man. Now, obviously, you know, that's a fighter's way of pronouncing that thing.
And I think that, like, you know, a lot of fans will probably, maybe you don't realize how good you have it, that we're getting this active champion and we're getting this persona, maybe until he's gone as well. And, you know, I'm maybe guilty of that. My qualms are more so about his fight style and how he chooses to fight sometimes. But I gotta say, I respect the man. I respect his activity. I respect what he's doing. But yeah, it's like Marmite, for anyone that maybe doesn't know Marmite. You either love it or you hate it. Harry knows well what I'm talking about there. That's a very unique maybe reference to people that may be listening over in North American side of the ways. But you either love him or you hate him. But you know what? He's here and he's active, and it's Sean Strickland that's standing in front of him. You know, any thoughts on maybe what I kind of said in the introduction about Sean Strickland, about, you know, crazy kind of talk and very controversial figure, and the fact that he's found himself in this position, and, you know, by maybe luck or by chance he's found himself in this position. Obviously, Dricus du Plessis was the one that was touted. He's kind of ruled himself out, maybe too close of a turnaround, and that could be a conversation for another day. That may cost him in the long run. But Sean Strickland is here. He's the contender. How do you feel about that, Harry?
So I think that it's probably the right choice. And what I say for that is middleweight is very quickly, and this is one of the questions I have, and maybe I'd really like to hear your points on it, and we'll get to it in a second. But middleweight is drying up very quickly at the upper echelon. Izzy has lapped Robert Whittaker now a number of times. He has fought Marvin Vettori twice. He is making a run around all of the contenders because there's nobody else for him to fight, right? And we don't know the situation of Khamzat Chimaev. It doesn't seem as though he's getting a fight booked anytime soon. And
he's booked to beat. He's booked to face Paulo Costa in Abu Dhabi.
Paulo Costa, that's it. Sorry,
that's all right. Yeah, no problem. Go on.
Now, okay, so even if he commits to middleweight.
And that's what I meant about Dricus as well, because already Izzy is talking this week about maybe giving the winner of that fight the title shot over Dricus du Plessis. But continue, please.
And that would make sense, right? Because let's say, and for the love of God, I can't imagine it's happening, but let's say Paulo Costa beats Khamzat Chimaev. I mean, do we really need to see Paulo Costa and Izzy too? I'm not sure that we do, right? I'm not sure that we do. Do we need to see another Jared Cannonier fight? I don't think we do. Do we need to see another Rob Whittaker fight? I don't know that we do. And so if Dricus du Plessis is not able to turn around quickly, and as you've said, and I think there is a conversation to be had another day, but let's quickly preface that conversation here. In the one of the press conferences on the media day, Dana White was asked about Dricus du Plessis, and his answer was, "You know how much I love guys that turn down fights." What more do I need to say? Right? So it's very likely that Dricus du Plessis is now going to be left outside in the cold, or at the very least, he's going to have to fight again. And it's going to be a difficult matchup for him in order to now acquire another title shot. And so who's left? The answer is Sean Strickland. And so I completely understand why the UFC had made the decision that they have. And to your point about the changing in personality, I wonder whether this is architected a little bit, because for the entire career that we have known Sean Strickland thus far, this has kind of been him, the brash, very outlandish talk, very sort of denigrating of certain types of people and certain sexes of people and whatever. And then this time he's sort of come out, like you say, is holding his girlfriend's hand, and he's trying to show a different side of himself. I wonder whether this is architected a little bit.
I don't think that's beyond the realms of possibility, because like there was a lot of talk that, and this fight took a damn long time to get. Like we were what, 4 or 5 weeks ago, we didn't have a main event for this fight, you know. And I think a lot of the stumbling blocks was UFC's reluctance to put someone like Sean Strickland in on a title fight. So I think there's a lot of substance to what you're saying there, and maybe a change of mentality. And, you know, fuck it, I'm here for it anyway. Like, but it's, you want people shining a light on mixed martial arts in the right way, and I don't think that Sean Strickland has. And I think UFC, even though, you know, they say we don't care what anybody says, it's not a good look for guys like Sean Strickland who go out and say outrageous stuff we still have a couple of days to go before the fight, so there's still plenty of time for it to happen as well. But like I said, when it comes to the chit chat, all that goes out the window when the two of these boys go in and the cage door closes on Saturday night. And you know, we're dealt with the same scenario here. You probably could go back and listen to our preview show when Alex Pereira took on Sean Strickland, and we asked and we wanted Sean Strickland. And I think I was more upset about that than anything else. I felt like personally hurt that Sean Strickland was so silly into not wanting to turn his fight against Alex Pereira into a mixed martial arts fight. And I think it was a recipe for the disaster when he went in and chose to bang with Alex Pereira. We saw what happened, knockout in the second round. And it could be another recipe for disaster for Sean Strickland if he chooses to do the same here against... I don't think it could be. I think it will be a recipe for disaster if he chooses to do that here. Harry, Sean Strickland, he's got to go in there and he's got to be a mixed martial artist on Saturday night.
Without a shadow of a doubt. Look, there is an element to Sean Strickland's game where he has an ability to crowd people, right? And he has an ability when he gets the jab going and he gets in a flow to do some damage to people, right? Like he certainly has that ability. He showed that in the performance against Abus Magomedov. But Abus Magomedov and Israel Adesanya are just not the same human. They're just not the same human, and they're not the same prospect on the feet. And for me, you know, this has been sort of the age-old question against Israel Adesanya, and that's, can you take him down? And if you can you hold him down? And if you can't, what are you going to do on the feet to stop the feints? What are you going to do to stop the rhythm? What are you going to do to be better than Israel Adesanya on the feet? And so far, the only person that's been better than Israel Adesanya on the feet is Alex Pereira. I certainly think we can make an argument that Jan Blachowicz was equal to, at the very least. And then obviously we saw the grappling, and that was absolutely fantastic gamesmanship and tactical nous by Jan Blachowicz. But I look at Sean Strickland, and the main question I have is, and this is kind of why I said the name, I said the word architected for some of his behavior this week. And that if he comes in, how many times have we seen Sean Strickland in a big spot? And I mean a really big spot, a main event somewhere, or against a fighter that's going to push him to a title shot or guarantee him a title shot, or whenever there's the one step before the carrot that you want, he always drops the ball. And he always manages to find a way out. Now, we can try and psychoanalyze that man. We can try and question why those things are. None of those things are facts. The facts are, when Sean Strickland has been offered a big opportunity, something happens and he does not fight how we are used to him fighting. And so I can't really look past those facts right now. But the actual tangible reactions that I see in the fight is he's drawn into biting on feints very, very, very easily. He does not protect his chin with an intelligent guard. It's a very loose guard. It's a very wide guard. It's very relaxed in its manner. And for some reason, for some reasons, that's good, right? Because it means he can fire and flick off that jab. And it's very, very loose. It's a very snappy jab. And it's very, very hard to read coming because there's no tension in his shoulders. The difference is that Israel is so dexterous and so versatile in his kicking arsenal that he's going to have you biting on low kicks as if it was a breakfast roll. Shout out Shawnee. And then from there, he's going to kick you in the head. And you're not going to know what's coming or when it's coming. And I do struggle to see that if Sean Strickland does not implement, at the very least, a grapple-heavy MMA fight, how he doesn't get finished whenever Israel wants it, really.
And that maybe brings us to our next kind of topic of conversation here. I was going to lead into this either way, but you've kind of kindly done it for me, is that, you know, we've seen moments in there where Israel has wanted to finish guys, and I think there's no other way to explain that. We've seen him in there not wanting to finish guys either, you know. We look back at Paulo Costa. He won that by second round. KO went after that, lost to Jan Blachowicz. After that, we saw 3 unanimous decisions in a row before losing to Alex Pereira. We went out there in the rematch. He secured an excellent an excellent second round knockout. Got me up out my seat. I've been craving that for a long time for Israel Adesanya. And the reason I feel so passionate about that is because I know he has that in him. And it's passionate / selfish at the same time that I want him to put himself at more risk for my entertainment. But we are in the sport of entertainment, that being said. Is there a danger that Israel falls back into that trap? Or why do you think that we did see that slightly more aggressive Israel Adesanya against Alex Bahia last time out?
Because there was something to prove. There was something to prove, you know?
There was that, and there was something to prove. And it also, I felt that Israel had his back against the wall a little bit in that fight too. And I think he had no choice. And that bears the question, it gives Israel Adesanya's opponents a very kind of tricky question going in there, because you can fight Jared Cannonier, and Cannonier can kind of chose to kind of fight a little bit on the outside and try and get into a technical battle, which he was always going to lose. Or you can try and draw Israel Adesanya out. And I think Alex Bahia kind of did that in the second fight, but it was to his own detriment in the end. And now anybody who's looking at someone moving forward and trying to press the action, may be wary of that happening to them now. But I think, whereas Israel Adesanya is the matador to his opponent's bull in the many of his fights, and sometimes he just chooses to wave that kind of, I don't know what they call it. What is it? A cloth or some shit like that? What is it? What's the proper word for it?
Fucking no idea.
No idea. Let's call it the red cloth for lack of a better term. He's waving that out, and he's happy to do that over 5 rounds. But, last time out, he's back against the wall. He decided to bite down and throw an overhand from hell, and followed it up, which knocked out Alex Bahia. And that's exactly what I wanted to see from him. And you would have to argue that him doing that was bigger than all of the 3 unanimous decisions, or maybe some other fights that a lot of people wanted to forget about in his mixed martial arts career so far. How do we decipher all of those facts, Harry? Or not facts, maybe facts mixed with a little bit of opinion there.
Sure. I think that there is an element, and this is just assumption, right? I have absolutely no factual basis. I've never asked Israel this question, but
I love when you assume things, though. That's my favorite.
It feels to me as though Israel is the type of person that already understands the depth of his own skill set, and he understands that on the feet, there's just not a ton that these guys are going to offer him in terms of challenge. And so I suspect that's quite hard to get up for. And there's an element with which you have to embody your status when you're a UFC champion, right? You have to embody that I am the champ. This is what I've worked for. This is what I deserve. This is the level with which I'm at. But I do think that can lead to a level of lackadaisicalness, which is that, well, I am the champ. Right. And I have this confidence in my skill set. And so if there's nothing that really forces me to be fearful, I guess, then I can just go in and coast. And I also feel like Israel is a very petty person. He holds grudges and he keeps them. And with Jared Cannonier, he was begging Jared Cannonier to win a couple of fights so that he could reward him with a title shot. Mm-hmm. That's not somebody you then want to go out and, really put a hurting on. It felt like he had a respect for Jared Cannonier.
I definitely would gather that too, but not with Marvin Vettori.
Right. With Marvin Vettori, it felt like, to me, that Israel wanted to prove that Marvin couldn't touch him. It wasn't about finishing him. It felt to me like he wanted to beat Marvin by a death of 1,000 cuts. He wanted to prove that Marvin was what he said he was, which is this pad robot, right? Now, did he achieve that? Maybe in his eyes he did. But in everyone else's eyes, I think everyone saw that if he'd upped the gears 3 or 4%, he probably could have got Marvin out of there. Now Marvin is a very tough man. He's also pretty defensively aware when it comes to the striking. But we could see from the end of the second round that we're not getting anything here in terms of significant offense coming back. And so if Israel had decided to put his foot on the gas, he certainly could have done more damage. But there's two other things I lean on here, and this is where from a non-fan perspective, I have to side with his decision to fight as he did. And that's that the first thing is if he loses to Marvin Vettori, the payment that he's going to receive is drastically different in his next fight because he's not the champion. And so those words from Tyron Woodley always ring in my ear when it comes to fighting styles for champions. And the other side is, it's like, if he can't find a way to get up for it, then I understand that you just win the fight, right? That's the main thing, is you just win. Now, I completely agree with you that when it comes to stardom, the performance against Alex Pereira, it wasn't the fact that Alex had beaten him. It wasn't the fact necessarily that he'd lost to him in kickboxing and all this stuff. It was the fact that he went in and back against the wall. He finished the scariest dude that he could finish. And that was a tale that people could really buy into. And that's a tale that the UFC really want to sell. And so I think
I think that if we see that in any of these fights, that he has the capabilities to finish any middleweight on this planet. It's just, I guess what we're trying to kind of get in between is maybe Israel himself drawing that out of him, or somebody else doing so in doing that. And he just hasn't been around enough opponents in order for him to do that. And now we're laid with Sean Strickland. Is the same thing going to happen? Is it going to be a one-sided beatdown over 5 rounds? You know, he's not going to have to fear about anybody. Like, I mean, the biggest kind of argument against the point, or to the point of him being born, was, you know, it's the court of public opinion. You have people that were leaving your fight in the middle of the 3rd round and the 4th round and the 5th round. And it's like, that's not a good look. And you don't want to see that as a champion. But he has the opportunity now, I feel, to build upon that, Alex Pereira, because he's fighting a much less skillful guy, a much less technical stand-up guy. And even if Sean Strickland does choose to go full-on MMA, and I'm still sketchy on that, to be honest, I think Israel Adesanya is still good enough to go out there and get the win. And I'm very curious, what are the kind of 3 or 4 key factors that you're going to tune in on in this fight that you feel? Obviously, I think it's safe to say I think Israel is going to win, and you think Israel is going to win. If you're Israel Adesanya, we've talked about what Sean Strickland needs to do. He needs to put him on his back. He needs to make things awkward. He needs to make things ugly. We're not going to... It's funny, we'll give fucking Israel shit for winning an ugly fight or not performing that well, but we'd probably be like giving Sean Strickland all the credit in the world if he was to close the distance and clinch up and make this a boring fucking grapple fest fight. But that's what he has to do to win. For Israel, what do you feel is what he has to do to win? And maybe you can share your opinion on Sean Strickland too.
Absolutely. I mean, just to sort of piggyback off what you've said there, I think the problem and the reason why we would turn around and clap our hands and be jubilant at Sean Strickland making this a dirty and gritty and grimy and difficult and ugly fight is because we look and we understand the skill set of Israel Adesanya, right?
100%. We're judging Izzy based off his skill set, for sure.
We know the ceiling, or we know the ceiling with which he's shown us. And the ceiling with which he's shown us is that he can be an absolute freak of nature in there. And he could do things that not many other athletes that we've seen in the UFC can do. And so we, of course, as selfish, hungry, lustful fans that we are, we're like, please, can I see that every second of every fight, right?
Just bleed.
Right. And so for Israel Adesanya, what am I looking for? Well, really, I'm just looking for a vintage Israel Adesanya performance, but with a little bit of sprinkle of venom in it. He is going to want to try and control the range. He is going to want to try and stand in front of Sean Strickland and feint and feint and feint. And I've written an article before on SevereMMA.com that you can go and have a look at, that I try and break down the Israel Adesanya feint game. But a lot of it is hip movement. It's eye diversion. It's moving his arms in certain directions, popping his shoulders in certain directions that make you think that a certain shot is coming. And when he gains reads on what your reactions are, he starts to formulate a game plan into what shots he's actually going to throw. He throws very risk-averse shots in the first round. He'll throw some leg kicks. He'll throw some teeps up the middle. He'll throw a couple of jabs here and there. Everything is much stiffer in the first round with Israel. He's really starting to work out the feints and what's going to work and what's not going to work. And then in the second round, he often just asks you some questions. So he'll hide a couple of shots, he'll throw a couple of shots, and he'll just see exactly what you're going to do with the initial set of reactions. And dependent on what you do is then what happens, right? And I think if Sean Strickland is able to make this as interesting as possible, in that if he chooses, okay, I know I'm going to feint on this, I know I'm going to feint on this, okay, he's got me feinting immediately, and just decides, fuck it, I'm just going to try and either batter him, or I'm going to try and close the distance and take him down. I think, as you've said, Israel is going to be forced to not gain the respect of Sean Strickland. That's the wrong thing, but he's going to be forced to be dominant in a violent fashion.
Mm-hmm.
And so for Israel, as I said, the range and the feints. But the other thing I'm looking for is the intention of his strikes. Because if the intention of his strikes was similar to Paulo Costa, where he was landing low kicks from second one and he wanted to absolutely destabilize the base of Paulo Costa, I'm going to say something outside. I didn't pick this in the SevereMMA chat, but I think it's important to say, is he has talked for a long time about submitting an opponent. Right, a long time he's talked about submitting.
He talked about this. I know Andrew McGahan has always put a bet on. I think it's in around 18 to 20 to 1, and he said that here. But I mean, at the same time, Israel Adesanya says a lot of things ahead of fights as well.
But I can feasibly see a game plan where he lands a plethora of leg kicks on Sean Strickland, and he then starts moving up towards the upper body, landing on the body, landing to the liver, these sorts of things. And I can see him landing a shot, because Izzy has big power, but it's accurate power. It's not power where it's like he hits you and it's a freak of nature like a Francis Ngannou or even an Alex Bahia. It's a power where he's just so accurate that when it lands in the perfect spot to wobble you. And so I can see and foresee a situation, like I said, I don't think this is what's going to happen, but I can foresee a situation where Israel lands a shot, wobbles Sean, and tries to submit him. Whether he does or not, I don't know, but he might try and submit him. And if he does and he succeeds, fair play, he's achieved what he wants. If not, I can just see Israel dropping Sean, towering over him, landing shots and finishing the fight. Like, Sean Strickland needs to put on a career best performance in terms of adhering to his mixed martial arts skills in order to stand a chance in this fight, I think.
And history would suggest that he might not have the mental capacity to do that. He's failed once, he's failed twice, and now he's on the biggest stage at all. It'll be interesting to see if he can overcome Israel Adesanya. Looking forward to that one. We shall move on, though, Harry, to the co-main event, and the big boys are in action in the co-main event. Tai Tuivasa returns to take on Alexander Volkov in a kind of similarly kind of matched fight. It's just so not over the moon about this. I like Tuivasa. I like his character. I like his kind of, I like the cut of his jib, is what we like to say back home sometimes. He's a fun, caring guy, but that fun and kind of lackadaisical attitude can sneak into the octagon at times for him, Harry. And, you know, this is definitely not a fight that he needs to come in with that lackadaisical kind of attitude. He needs to come in here. He needs to be focused. He needs to be composed, because, you know, Volkov is a big banana peel here. He could slip on and it could all go really, really wrong from a very awkward, tall, long, rangy guy. What's your thoughts on this one?
I don't want to be too defamatory here, but I feel like Tai Tuivasa has 2.5 minutes to get Volkov out of there. And if he's not, he's probably getting subbed. I can see something similar to the Romanov fight in that Romanov gave up, right? Like, Romanov looked for a way out early because his wrestling wasn't working and that was his A game. Tai Tuivasa obviously is far more diligent in his work than that and in his preparations than that, but we know what he wants to do. He wants to stand, he wants to bang, he wants to land big shots. Volkov is somebody that, unless your name is Derek Lewis, you can see and feel him warm up through fights. And when he gets warm and he gets loose and he gets ready, he's a tough man to turn away. But I think the thing that I fear for Tuivasa here is he doesn't utilize the frame that he has massively well. And a lot of his shots are very crowded inside shots. Whereas Volkov is a very tall man and uses his range well. Fantastic teep up the middle, really, really strong teep up the middle, good jabs, good straights. And I just fear that if Tuivasa if he isn't able to draw Volkov into a war, if he isn't able to draw Volkov into this type of battle where Volkov isn't using and utilizing that range, then he's going to struggle and Volkov is going to build up a head of steam. And we've seen that Tai Tuivasa has been hit to the body and it affects him drastically. And so I do fear for Tuivasa that if he can't drag him into a war, he's not going to go and look to take him down, right? That's not what we're expecting to see. Volkov might do some takedown stuff, but I don't expect it. I just think that this is the type of matchup for Tai Tuivasa to find out if he's actually been taking this sport seriously and if he's really been looking into skill acquisition. Because if he has, he will be able to find the chin of Volkov, right? Mm-hmm. But if he hasn't, man, it's going to be a quick fight.
Yeah, he's going to get found out. And, a loss here for Tai Tuivasa, a guy who was like propped up the majority of the last couple of years in the heavyweight division. A loss here is 3 defeats in a row, and you can quickly fall down back into reality. And it'll be interesting to see how Tai Tuivasa. I mean, I don't have too much to add. I think you broke that down absolutely perfectly, in my view. I think Tuivasa's got to do it early. He's got to take the confidence away from Volkov. But if Volkov can weather the early storm, I think he's going to either push through, maybe get that submission, or go on to win a decision. We move from the big guys to the little guys, Harry. The flyweight division. Manuel Kape is finally getting to fight after having a lot of pullouts in fights. He has had another one to deal with in this one too. Obviously, originally supposed to fight Kai Kara-France, and that would have been a mental fight. In steps Felipe dos Santos at 7-0 to make his UFC debut, and credit to him for stepping up. And I guess, nothing to lose here, everything to gain for dos Santos. And, I think Kape should be happy that he's going to be getting a chance to compete and get in there, and be interesting to see how he handles this task.
I hope he shows that there's levels to this. There's we talk about Israel Adesanya and his sort of sometimes unwillingness to perform to his capabilities. It feels like Manuel Kape is worse in some aspects. He comes up and he absolutely has some stinkers of fights that, sometimes he manages to win, fair play, but it just feels like there's an element of, he reminds me a little bit of Cristiano Ronaldo in his first 2 years at Manchester United, where he thought he was absolutely fucking brilliant. And then he'd step over the ball and fall over in the corner, And then there are some days and he comes out and he absolutely destroys teams and he's on absolute fire. And then, there are days that he, puts the ball literally out of the stadium with a free kick. That feels like Manuel Kape to me a little bit, where when he's on and he's dialed in and he's ready to go, he's world champion level, 110% world champion level. And then there are other days and you're like, why are you ranked?
Yeah.
Like, this is ridiculous.
Yeah. But it's been like a pretty stark stop for him. And he's been unable to kind of get to work up a full head of steam in his UFC career so far. Like, we've seen flashes of brilliance, we've seen flashes of petulance, we've seen like flashes of disappointment within, but we knew the guy he was and what he was capable of before coming over there. Obviously a former rising champion, went out there, had some couple of big wins over there, but what it's been lacking now is a really impressive run inside the UFC, and he has a chance to come in here, like you said, and show levels. And I think that's going to be very it's important for him to do if he's going to stake his claim as a title challenger in this division, because the 125-pound men's division is shit hot with talent right now. And, you've got to stand out from the crowd, really, don't you?
Well, he calls himself Starboy, right? And he absolutely has to shine. And this is an opportunity for him to do so. I haven't had time to go back and look at Felipe dos Santos, so I can't give a measured analysis of what he's bringing in. 7-0, loads of finishes, fair play to him. But Manel Kape is, we're talking about a debutant versus a title contender here, and that's I hope that is how it looks. But equally for Felipe dos Santos, he comes in and wins here. I mean, he's the one going to the stars and the moon. Like that's an absolutely unbelievable win on your UFC debut.
Absolutely it is. Moving on to the fight you're most looking forward to on the card, and that's Justin Tafa versus Austin Lane. Care to wax lyrical for a minute or two on this fight, Harry?
No. I mean, what's it doing here? Like, I get it. It's a big meaty men doing big meaty men things. Austin Lane, 12-3, fair play to him, has massive power in his hands, massive for the division, which, at 265 is going, but he's huge, massive legs, massive arms, big, long reach on the man. But Justin Tafa's he's just a lad that's probably a middleweight stuck in a heavyweight's body, like, whatever.
There's a couple of those knocking around the UFC as well, but yeah, like I said, we shall move on. Tyson Pedro kind of came back from a long layoff, Harry, and had a couple of good performances. Fell short in his last fight against Modestas Bukauskas, and now he has the chance to open up the card. He has the chance to kind of come in and create like a good buzz around himself again with a good knockout. It's either all or nothing with Tyson Pedro, I feel. He's coming in here against Anton Turkaji. I think, Turkaji is a decent fighter, but definitely a beatable fighter in terms of like what Tyson Pedro can bring to the table as well. Turkaji coming in on the 2-fight win streak, and this looks pretty much set up for a Tyson Pedro win.
Yeah, 2-fight losing streak for Turkaji. I think Turkaji has had stiff competition. Vitor Petrino is a solid fighter, and obviously Jailton Almeida is an absolute savage. Sure. But I think this is probably right where Tyson Pedro should be. Like Modestas Bukauskas comes in, he's not going to make massive waves in this middleweight division. He's a good fighter, but he's not a fighter that's going to set the division on fire. And Pedro just didn't quite have answers for the range and the length and the stance switching and the cadence of Modestas Bukauskas. And so I think this is probably roughly where Tyson Pedro should be fighting. So for that reason alone, I like the matchup in terms of level of matchmaking. I think it's a good one, but I expect Tyson Pedro to have enough here, but I would not be surprised if Turkaji comes out and, he's fighting for his job, right? That does a thing to a man. And so if you go out and you win against Tyson Pedro on this card, opening up the main card in MMA territory, all that stuff, fair play to you. But I'm anticipating a Tyson Pedro win here.
Yeah, as am I. I think, going back to what we were talking about, Harry, it's kind of like the UFC, placing fights and giving these guys winnable matchups. Now, obviously, the guys have to go out and do it, but definitely a winnable fight for Tyson Pedro, as it is, you could say, for Carlos Ulberg as well. In the next fight, he goes up against that Jung in the prelims headliner. And another interesting one as well for Ulberg, who's on a quite impressive win streak right now in the light heavyweight division. Do you think he has enough to get over Da Jung in this fight, Harry? Da Jung coming in on a 2-fight losing streak as well in this, with losses over Dustin Jacoby and Devin Clark in his last outings. This is kind of tailor-made for another hometown win, really, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is actually a good developmental fight for Carlos Ulberg, because every time we see Ulberg, he looks a little bit better, a little bit more comfortable in his range, a little bit more comfortable in the cage itself. But there's absolutely no shame in losing to Dustin Jacoby. We know that, he's the Alex Morono / Neil Magny of the 205 division, where a guy that can do a little bit of everything, but certainly isn't going to be knocking on the door of a title shot at any point. And then for Da Jung, Devin Clark can make fights ugly and difficult, and that's kind of what he did against him. But wins against Kennedy and Nzechukwu, that's a good win. I remember that fight. It was fucking crazy. William Knight is a good win. Going to a split decision draw against Sam Alvey is horrendous. He should have been cut there. But the Mike Rodriguez performance was a good one as well. So I think for Carlos Ulberg, this is really it's just a developmental fight. It's a Whereabouts are you in your career? Are you still adding tools to your game? Because, you know, the one thing we have to remember about Carlos Ulberg is that he is 32 right now. Okay, at 205, you can go on. You're a bit more long in the tooth in terms of what you can reach in your age for your athletic prime, but it's not drastically longer than what we'd expect other fighters to go for. So I like the fight against Da Young. I suspect if he goes out and he really puts a beating on Da Young, we'll see Carlos Ulberg in a much bigger fight next time out.
Absolutely. Yeah, very well broken down. Two of those fights are similar enough in how we break them down. We shall move on. We're going to rattle through the rest of this card. We'll work our way down. If anyone is tuning in just to listen to Kiefer Crosbie, we will give him the time. He's opening up this card. But first, we have to fall and talk about Jack Jenkins and Kape Mariscal. Look at Harry. It's as simple as this for me, right? If you're going to come at me with a stat that Jack Jenkins' leg kicks has broken 3 or 4, I believe, of his opponent's legs. 4 opponents' legs with it. Sign me up. Sign me up to watch this man every single time. And we've seen a taste of his leg kick action in previous UFC fights. This will be his 3rd, I believe, in the UFC. He's coming in against Kape Mariscal in the 145-pound division. Mariscal coming off of a win on his UFC debut over Trevor Peek. How do you see this one going down, Harry?
So Trevor Peek is a horrendous fighter. One of the worst skilled fighters for form of throwing punches I've seen in the UFC. And I watched Sandy Dandois. So
did you watch that chick on the French card last week? She was brutal as well.
Oh, stop. She was brutal. The thing for Kape Mariscal is he managed to weather the chaos of that Trevor Peek performance. And that tells me a little bit of something. Tells me how tough he is. Tells me how well he's willing and able to read the chaos naturally. That's interesting to me. Jack Jenkins, I think, is a very interesting fighter and one that has far more upside than Kape Mariscal. I do see this being this or the Jamie Mullarkey and John Makdessi fight is probably fight of the night. And that's what I think of both of these fighters. Both all-action fighters. Both want to go forward. Kape Mariscal landed everything but the 3rd kitchen sink on Trevor Peek and didn't manage to put him away. So I think that there's certainly some issues there with shot selection when they have their men hurt. But Jack Jenkins, you know me, we both love a fucking leg kick. And so the thing with Kape Mariscal is he kind of sways on his feet a little bit. He doesn't keep his weight balanced in one way or the other. And if you're swaying, it means that Jack Jenkins can start to time your stance cadence. And when he does that, when your leg is light and he slams a kick into it, when you put your foot back on the ground, if anyone's taken a leg kick, they are way worse when you put your foot back down and you weren't expecting to take the shot. So, yeah, I just think this will be a fantastic all-action fight.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think your description of Mariscal's kind of stance and the way it is. I mean, yeah, his stance is a one-way ticket to walking around on crutches for 2 or 3 weeks after this fight. So it'll be interesting to see if Jack Jenkins can kind of come in and cause a bit of a stir there. It would be his 3rd UFC win in a row. And, he'd be moving on up in the 145-pound division. A guy who's been around for quite some time, Harry, is Jamie Mullarkey, Ireland's own Jamie Mullarkey. He goes in and takes on another familiar face in John Makdessi. Canada's own John Makdessi. There's no losing here for me. An Irishman versus a Canadian man, it can't be beaten. But what are you expecting to see in this fight? This is absolute insanity written all over it, the way the 2 of these guys fight.
Yeah, I really think it could be. Jamie Mullarkey always walking fighters down, always looking to land his straight shots, happy to go to the body, lovely body kicks. John Makdessi is a guy, I think this fight could be made to be sort of more slow and more careful if John Makdessi chooses to fight that way, which sometimes he can do. But generally, we'll see a spinning back fist from a John Makdessi. We'll see a spinning side kick or a spinning back kick. So he's always got a bit of madness in the locker. And I suspect this fight to be similar to the other one, frankly, between Jack Jenkins and Kape Mariscal. If the story is told from both of them, they both love to walk forward. They both love to land and take shots. So it'll probably be a great fight all the way around.
Are we completely throwing the book out on Nasrat Haqprast?
Yes.
Yeah, he's going in there against Landon Quinones, and I mean, we've tried to talk him up quite a bit on this. And you know, deep down, he probably has the skills to make it happen, but he's just not being able to make it happen inside the UFC. This is a fight against Quinones that is, you know, if he comes in and produces the level that we've barely see him produce it really in the octagon, he should get the win here. But we just simply don't know now at this stage, Harry. Isn't that the case?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think, you know, when a fighter tells you something, you have to believe them. And especially when they tell you more than once. And Nasrat is the type of fighter that if he's fighting the perfect style for him, he will absolutely destroy them and look amazing doing so. But it doesn't seem as though the style he has is replicable to what we expect the level of the 155-pound division in the UFC to be. Landon Quinones tells you really how far he's fallen. He loses in The Ultimate Fighter, manages to get himself a contract, and now he's fighting Nasrat Haqprast, who, you know, 3 or 4 or 5 years ago, we were talking about potentially being a title challenger one day. So, I mean, that tells you all you need to know, really.
Yeah, it definitely does. And I mean, look at Haqprast is coming in off a win off John Makdessi, and you know, a solid win. But you know, you're going to have to be going out and putting this guy away if we're going to get us back talking again about moving up the charge. But I think at the risk of sounding a little bit too harsh, Haqprast is almost a lost cause now at this stage. Too hot and cold. And you can't be too hot. You can be too hot in the UFC, but you can't be too cold. And if it's a mix of the both, well, it's bad news. Moving on, Blood Diamond versus Charlie Radtke. I mean, if this fight stays standing, it's Blood Diamonds. But if you're looking at other previous fights that Blood Diamond has been in, you're looking to take this guy down and take him down as quickly as possible. He almost took himself down, God damn it, in his first UFC fight.
I don't think he stays standing.
You think Blood Diamond wants to take this down?
No. I think he gets taken down quick and
finished.
Oh,
yeah. Oh, for sure. Yeah, I think so too. I think so too. 3-2 inside the UFC. And I mean, yeah, there's not too much to talk about that. This is a fairly low quality fight. And yeah, it'll be interesting to see if he can keep it standard and make it exciting. But I feel a loss for Blood Diamond here, Harry, is probably the door on his UFC career will probably close.
He might get an Artem Lobov, right? Where, you know, he's thrown a second chance like he was in The Ultimate Fighter because of who he knows and because of who his training partner is. But this guy is not an MMA fighter. I'm sorry, he's just not. He's a kickboxer with dangerous stand-up, super dangerous stand-up, but he's not an MMA fighter.
100%. Moving on to Shane Jung versus Gabriel Miranda in the next fight. And I feel Shane Jung coming in here, Harry, on a 3-fight losing streak. From what I've seen, he's a better fighter than a guy that is on a 3-fight losing streak right now. And this is a huge fight for him. Like, I mean, there ain't no coming back from 4 in a row unless you're Sam Alvey inside the UFC, or unless you're who else was what's his name? That Chase fellow. Chase, what's his name? Chase Sherman. Yeah, Chase Sherman. But yeah, back to the point. Shane Jung really needs a win here. His record would fool you into the quality of a fighter that he's in. He has a big chance to get a win in the 145-pound division on home soil against Miranda here. Do you think he gets it done?
Probably not. Like, you know, you make your UFC debut against Alexander Volkov. Sure, lads, look, these things fucking happen. What do you want me to do? Like, what do you want me to do? But Rolando D in his day wasn't a bad fighter. You know, wasn't a bad fighter, stopped him with elbows. Austin Arnett, again, not an amazing fighter, but certainly a solid UFC caliber fighter. Ludovic Klein, that fight was absolutely disastrous for Shane Jung. Omar Morales, again, not a horrendous fighter, but he definitely should have been winning that Blake Builder fight. And it feels to me as though he is an old 30-year-old, you know, like when I watch him, he just looks slower than he used to, just doesn't look like he carries the same power. I wonder whether that's because he's been such a dedicated and diligent training partner, and maybe some of his best days have been seen in the gym. But I completely agree that 13-7 is not conducive to the fighter that he is. But for Gabriel Miranda, I mean, what a fucking horrendous UFC debut he had, right?
Terrible against Benoit Saint-Denis, who, like, you know, we've seen what, yeah. Definitely. And he took it up a division. He's back down at his more natural weight at 145. So I'd expect we'd see some benefits from that move back down.
I agree.
Yeah, moving on. Last but not least, but Irish interest on this fight as well. Kiefer Crosbie makes his UFC debut. He has been looking for this opportunity for quite some time now. He was on the Owl Triangle with us talking about it after the fact as well. Head on over there if you want to hear what he has to say about this UFC debut. But there's a big fight for Kiefer. Look, at this stage of his career, it's very unlikely that he's going to make a solid run and make a championship run. But he has a good opportunity here, Harry, to come in, getting some exciting fights. He's coming in against Kevin Joisset here, kind of a similar enough guy, whereas that he can be technical but does get drawn out. And it'll be interesting to see how Kiefer Crosbie done, taking on a huge task here, really, and taking this fight on short notice down in Australia. Coming in against a city kickboxing guy, but Jousset is obviously French, but fighting out of city kickboxing. There's no other way I can look at this under Kiefer coming in and trying to just turn this into a war. And when he does that, he has the capabilities of getting it out. You don't agree? What would you like to see happen?
No, I completely agree with you.
You would agree, yeah? You would agree?
I think, forget title runs. I don't think Kiefer has the skills for those, especially not in 170. I think he turned over to MMA just a little bit too late. And yes, okay, he had a storied kickboxing career, but as we've seen, it takes a lot of a special fighter to turn over from a full kickboxing career and turn it into a successful MMA career. So I think you're absolutely right. The route for Kiefer Crosbie here is to come in and absolutely put everything on the line in every fight he has, try and find himself 2 or 3 or 4 fight of the night bonuses, performance of the night bonuses from Dana White, because they will be handed out if he puts the right type of fight on. He's unfortunate that he's at the very, very, very start of the fight card, because generally those guys don't get bonuses. Yeah. But it feels to me, at least from the highlights I've watched of Kevin Joisset and the opinions of people that have a better opinion of that New Zealand, Australia scene, this guy is a heavy hitter, good kickboxer, and is a bit of a savage in the gym at City Kickboxing. So if Kiefer can draw him into a war, that's kind of where Kiefer's best at in all of his fights. We saw it against Alex Oliveira, and fair play to him for taking the fight on short notice, flying to the other side of the fucking world. But if you've got a UFC chance, you just don't say no, You
don't. And you know what? You could, maybe deep down, Kiefer might realize that, it's a fairly fair assessment about the talks of championship. But in his own right, looking back at his career and what he has wanted, this is a somewhat of a minor championship moment for him. But, he's not happy just getting signed with the UFC. He wants to get in there and get a couple of wins under his belt. And I definitely think he has the skill set to do that. Now, circumstances surrounding this fight are not ideal for him, but there's always a chance. And I shudder anybody who's going to count him out completely in this fight. But he's got to get in there. He's got to bite down on the gum shield, and he's got to make it ugly as fuck. And anything could happen in a war. We've seen it time and time again. And Irish MMA, Andy released the stats. The stats aren't great for UFC debuts. It's up to Kiefer to try and turn it around. But I'm delighted to see him get the opportunity, and delighted that there's another Irish person in the UFC. And you know what? It's great that they're there. Sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. You have to take the good times with the bad times. But Irish MMA is being represented on the highest level. And that, for me, as an Irishman, makes me happy. And I'm very excited. Everyone back home will be able to tune in, I think, on UFC Fight Pass and be able to see Kiefer relatively early on the night too. So that's one of the benefits of having him on the undercard as well. Harry, your final thoughts on this card before we finish up, good sir?
So I think, as we said at the top of the bill, lots and lots of regional name value, right? We know Kiefer Crosbie, we know Shane Jung, we know Blood Diamond, we know Nasrat, we know Jamie Mullarkey and John Makdessi, we know Jack Jenkins, we know Carlos Ulberg, we know Diane Young, we know Tyson Pedro. It goes on and on and on, right? I don't like this as a pay-per-view card, but I totally understand it for the regional fans. I understand it for the people that are going to be traveling there. It is tough when you're asking somebody to pay $75 for a card of this quality. But, in MMA, these things sometimes happen. And I hope on paper, we've talked about the fights here. There are a number of fights that could turn into absolute fireworks very, very, very quickly.
I think we could substitute kind of, technical entertainment for just raw violence entertainment on this, where we might get our money's worth from that.
Right. Couldn't agree more.
That's it. Follow him at Harry Powell or BJJ_Harry Powell on social media at O'Neill MMA. We'll be back to break down this card next Tuesday on the Balance Breakdown. Until then, enjoy the fights. Have a good weekend, and we'll see you soon.